Hey everybody, welcome to the continued series of how to pull wire. Today we're going to be talking about how to pull wire through free air. Now that might sound weird. How do you pull wire through free air? Because if it's free air, then how do we need to know how to pull wire? Well, in reality, wire has mass. Mass is affected by gravity. And if something is not held up into the air properly, fastened properly, it's gonna fall to the ground. So we actually need to fasten our wire, but we gotta find the right way to get our wire from here to there. And that's what this video is all about in free air. So let's jump right into it. All right, the first thing you're gonna need to do is you're gonna need to make sure that you get your supplies, and we're gonna talk through some of the basic supplies for doing free air pulling wire. Step one, make sure you have the correct wire. Make sure you know what type of wire, how many, and make sure you know where it's going from your origination to your destination. Once you've figured out what type of wire and you have the right type of boxes, you're gonna need to make sure you gather some other tools. And let's talk through what those tools might be. The first thing you're definitely gonna need is you're going to need a label maker. You need to make sure that your wire is labeled on both ends so that when it arrives in its destination, then at the origination, you know which wire is which. And you need to do that by having a label maker.
Okay.
Now, you might be thinking to yourself, but Bruce, I don't have a label maker. What if I've only got tape and a marker? I don't really recommend you using a tape and a marker. I really recommend you using a label maker. So make sure you have a label maker. Here's the reason why. White tape with black marker, this tape, whether it's electrical tape or this type of tape, whatever it is, it smudges very easily. And a lot of times that label is not gonna make it to your destination after you've played with it so many times trying to get it where you need to. The label's going to be gone because it's gonna smear off. So you might think, okay, well, it's not gonna smear if I use blue tape. What if I use blue painter's tape? The problem with blue painter's tape is that it is a very brittle, not strong tape. So a lot of times you'll put this on your wire, you'll write your label on it, and then when you're messing with it and you're pulling it, eventually it gets all damaged, and when it shows up, you can't read your label either. A label that you can't read is might as well not even be there. That's why we do not recommend using these methods. We do recommend using labels. So make sure you got your label maker. A couple of other things that you're gonna need, you're gonna want to have some good wire cutters. So we recommend these wire cutters. These are large diameter wire cutters. They're strong, they're made for cutting wire. We recommend these because you can use them over and over and over again. If you don't have a pair of these, you can use what would be considered like a more traditional type of snip to cut your wire. These don't have really the same amount of diameter. Might be a little bit more difficult to cut a lot of wire or large diameter wire, but you can use these. We do not recommend that you use some of the more common tools that you're gonna have with you, because the problem is that you're gonna damage the blades of these tools. So if you use your normal wire stripper, your wire strippers have a cutter in them. And if you use that cutter for cutting pulled wire, what happens is you oftentimes dull the blade to the point where it's no longer gonna easily score your outer jacket when you go to terminating with these wire strippers. And then if it doesn't score your outer jacket, these might as well be worthless. So you want to keep these as sharp as possible. You don't really want to use them for cutting wire that you've pulled out in the field. You might think to yourself, well, what if I use a pair of scissors? Well, it's the same problem. If your scissors get a nick in them, they get a gouge in them, now they're no longer very effective at cutting labels or heat shrink or the other things that we need scissors for. So we don't really recommend you using scissors. Also, fight the urge to use your snips. Your snips will get dull, and then they're no longer gonna cut zip ties, they're not gonna cut heat shrink, they're not really gonna cut some of the finer stuff that you use your snips for. So we don't really recommend using these normal tools. We recommend you using these tools. A couple of other things that you're gonna want to make sure you have is you're gonna wanna make sure that you have fish sticks.
Now let's see, how about a joke that has something to do with fish sticks? You know, because fish sticks sounds like fish dick.
Or glow rods. You know, the rods that we use for pulling wire. We're gonna get into how you're gonna use this a little bit later, but these become super handy when you're using free air pulling wire. You don't typically need fish tape. Sometimes it's a little bit handy to have around, but in general, when you're free airing, you don't really need fish tape, so you don't have to go try to hunt this down. You don't typically need pull string. So when you're doing free air, pull string's not necessarily that handy. Pull string is most commonly used in pulling in conduit, so you don't have to stress out about that. But once you get into the rafters, once you get into the attic, once you get above the drop ceiling, you're gonna need to have everything ready to make sure that you can fasten your wire above the grid so that it doesn't lay on the grid. And like I said, it has mass, and mass is affected by gravity, and gravity is gonna try to pull it to the ground. So you wanna have enough fasteners that you can effectively hang your wire where you want it up a grid. So let's talk about some just basic fasteners. The first thing I want you to see here is a J hook. You see that J? If I do it like this, you can see the J. J hook comes in a lot of different ways, a lot of different mounting styles, and the J hook is basically giving you a mounting point so that your wire can sit in it and be zip tied to it, so that your wire has a chase that it can follow. So you're gonna find all different kinds of J hooks. I did just mention zip ties. So you're gonna make sure that you have zip ties and that your zip ties these are really large zip ties. You typically don't need them this size, but they need to be the right size to be able to wrap around whatever it is that you're trying to secure your wire to. So make sure you have your zip ties. Another fastener, this fastener actually goes to like a Z purlin. You don't need to worry about this. That's not really what this is about. This is what this is about, is it's some sort of fastener that's gonna hook onto the structure that's up above, that's gonna give me an eye hook that then I can connect my wire to. So once my wire is in its location, I'm gonna need to fasten it. And so I can use the eye hook, I can use a zip tie, I can tie my wire, and I can hold that. This is another fastener that you can use. This can clip on to items like ceiling grid items. It can also fasten onto conduit and give you, mounting points. This J hook is also connected to something called a bat wing. So you're gonna have a hanger wire that your ceiling grid might be hanging to. If you're in a drop tile ceiling area, you've got your hanger wire coming down like that. And the bat wing, you take your hanger wire, you thread it through here, and then now you've got a rigid point so that your J hook is not gonna slide down, or your wire is not gonna slide down your hanger wire. Now you might be thinking to yourself, well, that seems like that's a little bit extra unnecessary. Can I just zip tie my wire to the hanger wire? So zip tie it like that. The problem with that is that there's nothing rigid to keep that wire from sliding down across that hanger wire. Eventually, over time, it's probably just gonna be laying on the grid. You don't wanna lay on the grid. Couple of other notes while you're up above your ceiling. It doesn't matter if you're in a plenum space, if you're in a drop tile or drop tile ceiling, or if you're in a barge rafter space. You want your cable to travel at 90-degree angles. You don't want your cable to, let's say that I'm going from here and I need to go here. You don't want it to go at a diagonal like that. You want it to go at a 90-degree. It might be easier if we show that on a graphic. Boom. You want it to go on a 90-degree because it needs to look clean, it needs to have its own chase, and the majority of codes in whatever municipality you are in require them to be at 90-degree angles. Now, you might be doing something on your own, it might be a retrofit facility, and you go, but it doesn't really matter.
No.
the answer to that question is no, it doesn't really matter. But the answer to the question is just do it the right way. Do it at 90-degree angles, and that way it doesn't matter who comes behind you. The situation, whatever the situation might be, you're gonna have your wire looking good and done the right way. Now, if I'm pulling my wire through free air, I need to understand my path. Where is this wire coming from, the origination point, and where is it going to, my destination point? And then I need to have my head wrapped around that path, and I need to know everything that I'm gonna need in order to hang that wire properly from its origination to its destination. And guess what? There might be walls between me and where that wire needs to go.
If there's a concrete wall in front of you, go through it.
And if there are walls, you're gonna need something called a sleeve through the wall. And that sleeve is basically a penetration point. It's typically conduit that allows you to get through the wall with your wire. Now, make sure you pay attention to your local building codes whenever you're putting sleeves inside of walls. Oftentimes, those walls are fire-rated walls, and they have to be closed up by fire caulk. So before you just willy-nilly go punch holes through walls to get your cable through, make sure you're working with everybody and all the other trades. Oftentimes, your electricians are responsible for providing your sleeves for you. All right, we've already talked a ton, and we haven't even started pulling wire yet. But we're about to get to it because you need to think through, okay, what's my path? Where am I starting? Where am I ending? How is this thing? And what's all the materials and everything that I'm gonna need in between those two locations. Now let's say you've got that figured out, and now you're gonna start pulling your wire. I highly recommend when pulling wire into a free air space, still using a glow rod or a fish stick as the point that you're gonna put your wire and how you're gonna connect your wire to go to where you need to go. As you can tell, if you can see this in the studio, I can reach a really long way with this, and I can kind of move it and manipulate it, because you're gonna need that because there's gonna be a lot of obstacles you're gonna be dealing with. So I recommend you start by connecting your wire to your fish stick. Now, let's say that we're gonna have 3 or 4 wires that we need to connect and we need to, free air through. You want to avoid making a really large, obstruction with those 4 wires. If you can kind of see that there, if I rotate it like this, you can see that's like creating a really big shelf. That's gonna be really easy to snag. So you wanna take your glow rod and you wanna stagger your wires across the glow rod. So I'm gonna stagger them kind of like this. And I know you can't see that, but I'm gonna get my E-tape. I'm gonna connect it like this. And then I'm gonna show you. I've got all those points at different levels. That's what I mean by staggered. And then I'm gonna start wrapping them onto my glow rod here. And what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to minimize the surface area that is gonna get snagged on things as I'm moving this through my free aired space. All right, so by creating a kind of penetration that allows it to grow over time, I'm gonna reduce the amount of snags. Take my E-tape, I broke my E-tape. I'm gonna add what's called a buddy tab at the end of it so that when it's time to pull that E-tape back off, I've got an easy tab to pull my E-tape. Another thing to note is when you're connecting your glow rod or your fish stick, you want to make sure the other end is taped up so that if you have to go backwards, you're not gonna snag something going backwards. So now that I've got my glow rod connected to it and it's all staggered, as I move it through items inside the attic space, it should get all those wires coming together. And now I can begin to move my wire around whatever obstacles I might be dealing with inside the crawl space area. It's It's also really important to make sure you're paying attention. Are you going over? Are you going under? You don't want to go over in one spot and go under in another spot and then go over again in a different spot. And then all of a sudden your wire just doesn't look clean and it doesn't have a nice clear path. You want to make sure you're following the same path across all your obstacles. So map that out as you're up inside the crawl space area and you're moving your wire into those locations. Once your wire gets into its basic area, then you pull your slack and you start using your fasteners that we've talked about to clean your wire, and you hang it, zip tie it, clean it up, and now you've brought wire from nowhere to somewhere through the free air, but yet it's still like fastened. You know what I'm saying? All right, so that concludes this video on pulling wire through free air. If you're learning things and you want to learn more, make sure that you like and subscribe. The series is not over. This is a 4-part series on pulling wire. So we'll see you on the next one.